What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So it was back in February when it was announced that former President Jimmy Carter, age 98, would enter hospice care after deciding to forego additional medical treatment. Now, it was never disclosed exactly what was wrong with him, but it was remembered that over the last few years, back in 2015, I think it was, 14 or 15, he was diagnosed with brain cancer, but through, I think it was immunotherapy, his cancer pretty much miraculously disappeared. And he's had some other issues over the years, but it's never been definitively stated what's wrong with him. But President Biden did say something about the cancer maybe have come back, and we'll have to wait and see about that as far as what was going on with President, or what's going on with President Carter. But anyway, I'm making this video because his grandson, Josh Carter, has stated that, in his opinion, former President Carter and his wife, Rosalind Carter, former First Lady, are in their final chapter of life, which can be interpreted as saying that they're near the end. They've been in, he has been in hospice care for a very long time now. A lot of times when people are in hospice, they don't last long. Maybe days, weeks, maybe a couple of months. It's been about 6 months, I think, for Carter, which is a long time to be in hospice. But apparently, though, he's getting weaker. They said that his mind is very strong. His mind is strong, but physically, he is deteriorating. I got a sense last year that Jimmy Carter's health was deteriorating because I noticed at his 98th birthday celebration, he was in a wheelchair. And all the way up into his 90s, his mid-90s, Carter had always been mobile. Guy that walked. I think that fall that he took back in 2019 really took a lot out of him. I think he broke his hip, and I don't think he's been the same since, quite honestly. But he just looked fragile, and I was thinking to myself, I don't know how much longer Jimmy Carter's going to be here. His wife, Rosalind, was diagnosed with dementia recently, so that has to be kind of hard on him as well. They have been married since July of 1946. They have the longest sustained marriage for a presidential couple in history, 77 years, breaking the record of, I think it was 73 years, by the marriage of George and Barbara Bush. I think they got married in 1945, and it ended when Barbara passed away in April of 2018 at age 92, some 73 years. George H.W. Bush, the 41st president, passed away a few months later on November 30th, 2018. He was 94. At the time, he was the longest lived United States president, but he has been since surpassed greatly by Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, who is 98, is by far the longest lived American president. Matter of fact, when I think of presidents and vice presidents, I think the only person that has lived longer than him, off the top of my head, I believe is John Nance Garner. John Nance Garner, who was the first vice president under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was 98 years old when he passed away in Uvalde, Texas, back in 1967 when he was 98, just 15 days shy of turning 99. Matter of fact, it was announced that Uvalde was going to be celebrating his 99th birthday when he unexpectedly passed away. So I think that's the only person that's had a longer lifespan than Jimmy Carter, as far as top-ranking elected officials, national elected officials. With the passing of Al Q, I think his name, I think that's how you pronounce it, former Wisconsin governor who was 99 on August 18th, Jimmy Carter is also the oldest living former governor. Jimmy Carter, of course, became governor back in 1971, elected in 1970. He was governor of a state, Georgia, that had one of the most ardent segregationists preceding him, Lester Maddox. It was Jimmy Carter who was pretty much the first Southern governor to denounce racism. Jimmy Carter has always been seen as a friend of the black community. He grew up around black people, and he is seen as probably I'm just thinking through my head, he's probably outside of Lyndon Johnson, whose policies were the most friendly and beneficial to black Americans, although personally, Lyndon Johnson still harbored some bigoted views. The same thing with Abraham Lincoln. Even though these presidents had the most beneficial policies toward African Americans, individually they still harbor a lot of racist views. When it comes to individual views, I think Jimmy Carter was probably the least racist of any president we've ever had. So, it's funny because when I was growing up, I always heard about how terrible a president Jimmy Carter was. Right? But if you really look at Jimmy Carter's presidency, while it was not the most successful, obviously, there were some moves that he made which ultimately proved beneficial. One of the biggest moves that he made, let me look it up right quick. Make sure I got the year right. One of the best decisions Jimmy Carter ever made was his appointment of, I think his name was Paul Volcker, as Fed chairman. Paul Volcker was the 12th chairman of the Federal Reserve from 1979 to 1987. It was during his 10 years chairman at Volcker was widely credited with having ended the high levels of inflation seen in the United States throughout the 1970s and early 80s. It was Carter that nominated him to succeed J. William Miller. But see, by the time the changes and some of the changes in policies that Paul Volcker put through as Fed took effect, by that time, Ronald Reagan was president, so Reagan got all the credit. It was Jimmy Carter that had to deal with all the shit. Jimmy Carter had to deal with a lot of shit that Nixon and Ford did. It was Nixon that artificially did things to temporarily make the economy seem good in 1972 so he could run for re-election and win his big landslide. But then after, we saw the economy start to... we saw inflation begin to rise. We saw interest rates go up. We saw all these things go on and then get worse under Ford. And then it just got even worse under Carter because a lot of policy changes, a lot of things that go on economically that the Fed do, that all these different things happen. It's a delayed reaction. You don't see it until years later. Just like that big tax cut that George H.W. Bush approved of with the Democratic majority Congress in 1990, right? That did have a big beneficial boom to the economy, but we didn't see it until years later when Bill Clinton was in the White House. And a lot of that, plus some other things, I'm not a big economic guy, but I do know some basic things. Those led to the economic boom that we saw in the 90s that Bill Clinton got credited for. But it really wasn't just Bill Clinton. Now, he didn't fuck it up, but it wasn't just Bill Clinton. But anyway, I hate to see Jimmy Carter go, man. I was born under Jimmy Carter, and he's the longest, not only is he the longest lived American president, but he's had the longest post-presidency of all time. He's been an ex-president now for some 42 years. That blows away the record that was previously held by Herbert Hoover, who was a former president for some 31 years. So, anyway, those of you old enough to remember Jimmy Carter, tell me what you guys think.